In today's gospel, we hear the story of the death of John the Baptist. But in the Gospel of Matthew, it is, as we hear it, it is presented as a flashback of sorts, as a response to what Jesus is doing, his teaching, his miracles. Herod hears word of it and is concerned because he thinks that John the Baptist has come back to life. And so it quickly fills us in on the story of how John the Baptist came to die. The beginning of the gospel, we know that he is the forerunner of Jesus. Everything happens, and John slides to the background. At this point, we hear that, in fact, John has been executed now. And so the story itself, we hear a few times throughout the year, including on the feast day of the beheading of John the Baptist itself. Certainly, it's the story of worldliness, of sin and lust coming to a head versus the righteousness that Herod has an illegal and incestuous marriage that anyone would have considered as such, but of course no one will say it to the king except the ever-booming voice of John the Baptist tells him to his face that you can't have her, this is incest. But nonetheless, we see that Herod gives in. These two are united through their common lust. And then on another occasion of lust, Herodias' daughter herself makes a spectacle of this dance that gets Herod to lower his defenses and give in to a politically dangerous move that leads to him having to execute John the Baptist. So all of this is interesting because the story of how John dies is important. But when John was last presented, he was the forerunner of Jesus, the voice that went before announcing the coming of Jesus. He's the original Baptist. He's there at the baptism of Jesus. So he carries out this role as the forerunner, the completion of the Old Testament prophecy while announcing that the day of the Savior is at hand. But what's fascinating is not only does John now become Jesus' forerunner in death as well, as is commonly noted, but he becomes his forerunner in the sense of the incompletion in John that is completed in Jesus. And what is that? Well, we see that Herod is worried because John was known for his great preaching and perhaps even miracles. And now the second Herod hears of what Jesus is doing, he assumes that John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and he's even more confounded by it. Now, of course, it's not true. John isn't raised from the dead. This is Jesus doing it. But it is a foreshadowing that Jesus himself, after another crooked politician, for convenience, agrees to execute Jesus. Jesus is the one who will not be bound by death and will rise from the dead. And so it's fascinating that in so many ways, John the Baptist is indeed the forerunner of Jesus and foreshadows what will happen to him. And so we hear the story of the fall of this great saint, the bridge figure of the Old and New Testaments, and we get a point ahead to what will happen for Jesus moving forward as the Gospel of Matthew proceeds in chapter 14 and beyond. May God bless you all.